It's
Brian
and
Haley and Vanessa.
And we're all coming to you live from the Teaching and Learning Center upstairs in the library. So the next time we do this, you can join us. And we'll do another one. I keep forgetting which camera to look at. We'll do another one when we come back from the break after you take your midterm. And I realize the midterm is past the midterm point, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is that when you come back from spring break, and I hope you have a good spring break, we'll have on our site the midterm, and it'll be available from Monday through Wednesday, and you can access it anytime. But once you access it, you have to sit there and do it because it's timed. I'm going to give you a lot of time. I'm going to give you 5 hours. I know you're not going to need half that, but I just don't want anybody to stress out. And also, as I was telling Brian and Haley and Vanessa, it has happened in the past where people press send and they somehow lose everything that they had been working on. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is, as you're writing your responses, to also save it simultaneously in a Word doc, just in case anything should happen. Make sense, you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. I've experienced too many students' tears in the past, and I don't want that to happen again. Like I said, it's going to be timed, so you're going to see like a little clock kind of ticking down, but that would make me nervous. That would make you nervous. So there's a way to just move that down so that's not right in front of you. But you should be aware of how much time you have. So make sure that whenever you take it, you can do it in a way where you won't be interrupted. Okay, so last night I sent you guys a string of emails responding to your study guide questions. On the midterm, you're going to have 15 questions, and the 15 are going to be based on what you guys have posted, either direct questions or some variations. There's also going to be some other questions that I will put up there as well. They're going to be a lot of extra credit questions. So if you're missing any discussion board or a post, this is a way to make some of that up. Or if you just want additional points to kind of ensure that you're going to do well, I would take the time to do the extra credit questions, especially since you have so much time. So what I want to do is just go through some of the posts that you guys gave. Obviously, I won't have time to go through all of them, but I'll go through some. So let me get to our site. Okay, so here we are. Here's our study guide. And I posted one this morning, some extra credit questions. Now, I noticed that there were some poems that nobody talked about in their post. Yeah, like Robert Frost's After Apple Picking. Nobody mentioned that. Okay, that's one that I might talk about, but I would probably do it in extra credit, right? I want to honor the questions that you asked, but I also want opportunities for you to talk about these other pieces. Langston Hughes, like for example, Theme for English B, or his poem where he says, "Life ain't been no crystal stair." Those could be in the extra credit section. And then also there's Paul Laurence Dunbar's When Melindy Sings. So some of this, like When Melindy Sings, that's online. So it'd be nice to have a hard copy in front of you, right? When you're doing this. Make sense, everyone? Okay. Let me go back. Okay. There were a lot of great questions about Raisin in the Sun. One thing I want you to think about is Lorraine Hansberry's description of setting, right? There's a lot of information packed, not only in her descriptions of setting, but even how people's demeanors as they talk with one another. But I want us to look at settings. So for instance, she writes this: Act 1 opens with the younger living room would be comfortable and well-ordered room if it were not for a number of indestructible contradictions to the state of being. Right? That's in the descriptions, right? To help us set the stage, to help us create this landscape for these characters. Well, what does that mean? And what does it tell us about the play? Or there's this other descriptor. Weariness has in fact won in the room, right? You can see that on the stage. Where do you see that? And what does it reveal about the play or the situation that these characters are in? There are these things that keep resurfacing, like Mama's plant. If you notice that, the plant keeps coming back. Why is that significant? Why are these certain symbols, why do they keep coming back? So those things weren't talked about, but I kind of wanted to, give you an idea of that might be an area that I might go into for one of the questions. Cool?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you noticed, I tried to answer the questions so that they're all lumped together, like answering all the Raisin in the Sun questions together. And that was so that when you're going through this study guide over the break, you're not hopscotching around everywhere, okay? One of the most common things that came up in your Raisin in the Sun posts was, let's look at these two characters together, right? Arissa said, for instance, she said, compare and contrast Ruth and Benny, right? How do the two handle the men in their lives? Someone else said, compare the two suitors of Benny. Who said that? I think it was Chris. Said, compare Sagai and George, right? So what I would probably do is just say, you guys choose two characters that you want to hold up together next to each other. What is it that we can learn by looking at these two in comparison? And rather than telling you which characters to look at, I might make it your choice, okay? Because that came up in about 3 or 4 posts. So that's something that you can kind of think about as we are, as you're working on the play. Brian talked a lot about Walter, and I really liked that. You said, in what ways is Walter struggling for identity? And so, I'm not trying to answer the question, but I am giving you like, boy, you could look at this, you could look at this, right? When we're talking about struggling for identity, well, there is his father kind of looming over him, the figure of his father and how his father was with money and what, his father's character, something that he kind of has to live up to or work against. And how does that impact his identity? Issues of money. The mom says, use something new, boy. She's noticed a change in him. So you might think about all the things that kind of factor into those issues of identity. So the struggle for money, his father, he's very ambitious, right? And he's got this drive and desire. And so how is that wrapped up in identity? Maybe the need to feel purposeful, right? Or to be a provider, or issues of masculinity, or all these things could contribute to issues of identity. And at the same time, we have Benny and her struggles with identity. We see that with her experimenting with her hair, right? And she becomes increasingly more aware of her cultural heritage, and we can see that she's kind of playing with her identity throughout. So I think there are a lot of identity issue questions in A Raisin in the Sun. So I can definitely see thinking about issues of identity.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when we do our midterm,
Uh-huh.
do you want us to provide quotes, or is it just from our personal view?
Well, I would want you to support your response with quotes.
For like the one or two quotes.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I don't want is for you to answer it by just giving me a quote
Yeah.
and letting that quote speak for itself.
Mhm.
That quote should support a point that you are trying to make, that you are arguing. Okay? And then you'll use a quote and, if possible, tell me where that quote comes from, like if you have
The
a
page
page
number.
number.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not like looking all over the text for it.
I was wondering, are most of the questions, like the factual ones, obviously not, but most of them, they're like our interpretation, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if you're able to hear, Haley was asking if most of the questions are about interpretation. And that's true. Like most of them are about those inferential questions or about those evaluative questions, like, and even some of those divergent questions, like how would this story, I think you ask, how would this story be different had they made that deal with Linda, right? And so like those, any question that I ask, it will be where you're going to be able to, there's going to be a lot of your own active thinking about it or your own critical thinking. But it's got to be supported with, you got to be able to point back to the text. Where do you see this?
So it's not like a specific answer you're looking for us to develop something.
Right. So those factual questions are really important because it helps us all know that we're on the same page, right? And it's just getting to the surface of the story, but we're going to go beyond the surface of the story. Does that make sense?
And then you said a paragraph or two for each question.
Yeah, just a well-developed response, short paragraph response, but developed enough where you feel like I answered that fully. I feel comfortable with that, right? And you've got enough time where they don't have to be terribly rushed. Anyway, there are some other Raisin in the Sun questions, and I respond to them. And again, there's some where I tell you, I'm not going in that direction, and it's just I want you to know that, so you're not focusing on the wrong thing. Mending wall. What came up a couple times was that idea: good fences make good neighbors, and maybe think about what does that mean within the context of this poem, and maybe I want to hear some of your analysis of that. Right, so I'm going to give you room to give me your analysis, but it's got to be contextualized. I mean, it's got to be linked back to the poem. Don't lose sight of the poem. The Sheriff's Children. Well, actually, I think this is Gilded Six Bits. Jason called it Sheriff's Children, but he mentioned the Six Bits, and it said, look at Missy May, and how does her character change over the course of the story? Is she a static character? Is she a dynamic character? I think we have a very different Missy May at the very beginning of the story, which I think, Brian, you said is kind of like light. There's like a lightness to the relationship between Joe and Missy May at the beginning. But once we find out what happened, you see that her whole demeanor, her whole character changes. And then also there's the issue of her pregnancy. And so like, how does she change over the course of the story? Or Joe, I mean, he too goes through these changes. So I could see asking you about a particular character, or maybe I could say, pick a character that you think, that you see a lot of transformation within that character in Gilded Six Bits, and tell me more about that, okay? Pick one of the characters and tell me why you think they go through such transformation. Someone else mentioned, and I don't know who it was, about the significance of the coin of the 6 bits, and I'm thinking like that idea of gildedness, something that's kind of covered with gold, and maybe think about that idea of appearances.
Inside, not on the outside.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Mm-hmm. Right. What people show, what they're, the appearances and what that represents for people in terms of having a fulfilling life, right? But there's a lot throughout about appearances and reality. So I could see asking something about that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go down. And again, I'm not going to go through every question, but just look through them. Chickamauga, the Bierce story, is a really
story?
Bierce.
Oh,
Bierce, Ambrose
I
Bierce.
was like,
Or the-
I don't remember a beer story.
Or the story of, I love a good beer story. But no, that's not a good beer story. But what's really interesting to me, and I think I told you, someone said something about the child being deaf, being a deaf mute. What's fascinating to me is that we don't even know that. We know something seems off. I mean, we're getting everything focalized through this character, right? And everything is driven by his movements. Everything, the narrator is just perfectly aligned with that kid. But it's not until the end that they say, oh, he's deaf mute. I'm curious, why did Ambrose Bierce make that decision to tell us that at the end? So this is a divergent question on what if. How would this story be different if he told us that up front? How would we read this story differently? And I think that's a rich area of exploration, right? Why did he decide to make this character deaf mute too? But I am interested in that revelation when it comes. So I just wanted to share that with you because that's something that I might think about. We have Kate Chopin's The Storm. Let's see what Sarah asks. Oh, question 3. What is Kate Chopin trying to convey about marriage? So if you remember The Storm, here's this couple, and the husband and the son go out, and then there's this horrible storm that comes in, and then the two characters have this very heated sexual moment together, right? And then the sky's clear, the lover goes, and then here come back the son and the husband. Well, does she feel bad about what happened? Is she beating her breast in remorse?
Not at all.
Not at all. So what is this telling us about, this is Sarah's question, what is Kate Chopin trying to convey about marriage? And there was a lot of heated reaction to this story because here it is, this sin is committed and there are no repercussions, right? Not even feelings of guilt. And so what is it that she's trying to say? And we can tie that, let me see what I said. Oh, with her question 4 is she asks, is this a story about a female embracing her sexuality shamelessly? So do you see that as something to do with female empowerment, right? Is that the point of the story? Or maybe some kind of hybrid of those two questions, right? So that right now, that's interesting me. So just to let you know. So I'm just kind of telegraphing where I'm going, but also I'm just giving you an idea of what's interesting me right now. But know for sure that the 15 I ask are going to come from this guide that you guys have all created. Let me see. We have the sheriff's children. Let's look at Adam's questions. So I said question 2 interests me. Did any of you think about To Kill a Mockingbird when he goes and no? There's a little bit of an Atticus Finch kind of quality to that character, but then everything changes once we get that backstory, right? So he says, why did the sheriff defend Tom from the town if he believed that he would be likely to be hung anyway? Let me see. And I said, of course, our initial impressions of the sheriff are challenged later in the story. I don't think I'm going to ask that, number 2. Let me see as number 3. Yeah, I wasn't clear exactly about number 3. Let me see. had the sheriff done what Tom said, how would the story have changed? So I didn't know if there was the implication that maybe what Tom was saying was not true. I just took it that it was true. But if you don't think it is, then of course you'd have to support that with the text. Let me go back to the study guide. What do we have coming up? There's more Chickamauga, more of the storm. Oh, an episode of war. So Eric kind of asked the question, and I think I kind of changed the question on him, which is not nice of me. But he said, but it's in the spirit of what he's getting at, I think. So he asks, well, no, it's similar to what he's saying. He's saying, would the lieutenant have come to the same realizations if he weren't injured? Something that I want us to think about is that after he gets injured, it completely changes the way that he looks at the world around him. And I think I mentioned this idea in a couple of different posts. Let me see if I can find another one where I talk about it at greater length. Let me go back to the study guide. Where else? Oh, so here's Jacob on an episode where, let me see if it's there that I put it. So I said, we can look how getting shot impacted his actions. He was asking about the way that he's holding the sword. Why is he holding the sword? And you could imagine that he must have been in shock, right? And that must have had some impact on his reactions. But also think about how being wounded changed the lieutenant's way that he sees the world around him. We are told, quote, he was enabled to see many things which as a participant in the fight were unknown to him. So if he were in the thick of war, the thick of battle, he would have one way of seeing. But because he's removed from that once he's injured, that just changes the way that he sees everything around him. And so that might be something that I ask you to think about. Does that make sense?
It's like how his world changed after.
Or how the way that he saw the world changed too. But it could be his world, but something along those lines. I mean, that's what I'm toying with. Let's see. Old Rogum and his Teresa. Let's see what's asked here. Did I not answer her? Oh, look at that. I didn't answer her. That wasn't nice of me. I'll have to go back in and look at what she said. But I think I did answer someone on Old Rogum. Brian, maybe I answered you. Oh, you were asking about her age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teresa's age, and how that might explain her decisions, right? And in many ways, this is kind of focused on a generational divide. I mean, it's a cultural divide, but it's a generational divide too, between her father and her. And also, when she looks around at all what everyone else her age is doing, it's also about that kind of wanting to experience that for herself. There's a lot about hormones and just kind of wanting to experience life to the fullest. And in many ways, it's kind of coming of age. And so you might think about how Teresa's age impacts her decisions or her attitudes. So that's something that I'll toy with. And certainly there are other possibilities. Not a lot of people did Old Rogum. To build a fire, there were a lot of good to build a fire questions. Let me see what Adam said. Okay, I didn't use Adam's, but that doesn't mean that they weren't good questions. There are just so many I could use. Let me see. Where am I? What Eric said. Eric. Oh, that's not me. No, I'm not using his. Again, that's not a reflection, but it is important for you to see where what I'm not asking so that you won't study for the wrong things. Brian, maybe I responded to yours. I said I love questions 2 and 4, and I think that they're interconnected, and it all had to do with, are we able to empathize with this character? And clearly I know that's something that you're deeply interested in, right? And we might be really invested in his situation. Does that translate to being invested in the character? And so I am interested in people's thoughts about those same questions. And I do see 2 and 4 as connected, right? In what ways did the author keep the reader from empathizing? And then was it difficult or not to care for him, right? So those are good, okay? And again, not saying that those I didn't choose are not good. It's just, I just kind of know which way I'm thinking. Birches. Let's see what Sarah had to say about birches. And then we're nearing the end. We'll do Paul's case. I know we're limited for time. She asked what the birches symbolize. Let me see. Did I respond to her? I didn't even respond to her. Not nice of me.
I did purchase.
You did as well?
Mhm.
Okay, did I respond to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let me look. Where's yours?
Right there.
Okay, I said I like numbers 1 and number 3. I can see asking students to interpret the line you have chosen. And then I can see asking students to talk about themes of mortality and escape. The line that you chose was Earth's the right place for love. And maybe to offer some thoughts about that, especially within the context of the poem Birches. So when you say, is it something that I can just answer? I could respond to Earth, the right place for love without ever have Birches. But don't forget that this line comes from somewhere. There's a context feeding this line. So you can share some of your thoughts, but be sure to tie it back to the poem. Okay. So I'm not going to open every single one, but I do want to talk a little bit about the yellow wallpaper. So again, you see I put them all together. A couple people ask about the figure of the woman in the yellow wallpaper and why is that important. And so I'm leaning towards that because it came up several times. So that's what Ariana's saying. Why did the narrator feel a connection to a woman in the wallpaper? Some people say, was she crazy? And I think if we just say, well, she's crazy, that's kind of a reductive way to look at this text. And let's think about everything that led up to the place that she ended up. Think about, someone asked about her husband being a doctor. They said, is that important? Do you guys think that's important, that her husband's a doctor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so why do you think that's important?
Because I think if he was like in another, like career wise, I think he wouldn't be so involved with
Okay,
keeping her.
maybe be less involved.
Yeah.
There's a sense of authority. Well, who am I to challenge you? You're a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And her brother is a doctor, right? And they're men.
Yeah.
And so, like, they have diagnosed her, and, don't do anything that's going to tire you out. And I ask you to think about, like, these concepts of being hysterical, hysteria, hysterectomy. It all comes from, like, saying of the uterus, of the womb, is how those are translated. And so there is this kind of,
Of the woman.
of the woman. So there is this idea that there's this condition that rather than dealing with real issues of depression or anxiety in a thoughtful way, we just say, oh, they're hysterical. And it's also important, I think, to know that she's in a room that used to be a nursery, because there's a lot of infantilizing of her that takes place. Think about everything that led up to that break towards the end when she is crawling around, right? Does that make sense, you guys?
Mm-hmm. So there'll be like 1 or 2 questions on that.
Yeah, 1 or 2 questions about the yellow wallpaper. We wear the mask. We could talk about issues of masking. Of course, there's a clear connection with the Mark Twain piece about Aunt Rachel. I think that's a clear story where we see some masking. Love song. Let's see a couple of questions for love song. I wrote, in response to Christopher's post, I suggested that I can see asking students to identify, illustrate, and discuss the significance of a theme of the student's own choosing. Like, just choose a theme, something that you see woven throughout the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And it could be of your own choosing, but then you'd have to really support that and illustrate that with the text. Her question 4 is, the narrator seems to want to ask a question, but then the narrator never asks it, or the speaker of the poem never asks the question. Does that bother you? How would this poem change if an explicit question were asked? Right? What's the impact of it being left open? I've got this big question, do I dare, and do I dare, and do I dare? And yet it never kind of surfaces in any
Doesn't offer you any
explicit.
resolution.
Huh?
It just doesn't offer you a resolution.
That's
but
right.
It keeps you focused on him.
That's
rather
right.
than on his.
So what is your, so I could ask, like, what's your feeling about that never being resolved? And in what way is that what the poem's about? In many ways. Someone asked about the refrain, in the room the women come and go, talking to Michelangelo, and it kind of comes up a few times. Well, what is Eliot trying to convey with that refrain? I can see doing something around that. And then someone said, describe the setting of Prufrock. Now the setting, it takes place in different places, right? We get the tedious streets, right, with the sawdust floors, and we get his fantasy world of being in the ocean like a crab, or with the mermaids, the sirens. And we also get these like kind of little tea parties where the women talk of Michelangelo. So I think we've got a few different settings. Is there anything else?
Paul's case?
Yeah, okay, I'll do Paul's Kiss in one moment. Someone brought up The Road Less Traveled, and I don't think I'm going to ask about that, just to let you know.
Okay.
A great poem, I love it, but I don't think, with 15 questions, I don't think I'm going to ask that.
What about the Outcasts?
Where's Paul? Oh, The Outcasts of Poker Flat. Let me see. How are we doing on time? Let's see.
So if we read over all your comments, we should get a good idea
Of-
of what you're gonna ask.
Yeah, but some, like I was reading and I said, I'm going to think about this. Like I said, I'm going to think more than just about 15 things. But, you'll get a general idea of the direction that I'm thinking about heading in. I'm trying to telegraph it as much as I can before I've actually written the exam.
And we'll know like what pieces you picked out, by the way, by the ones you said that.
Yeah, I will not pick out anything that's not up here.
Okay.
Okay. She asks, oh, where's me? I'm leaning towards 4. What's 4? She asks, what do you think about the end of the story? Right. So that came up a couple times. What do you think of the end of the story? Some said, what do you think about the secret council's decision to send out these outcasts? I'd like us to think about what does it tell us about Poker Flat or about the secret council, right? Why did John Oakhurst get booted out? Well, he was a professional gambler who was winning. What about the people he gambled with? They weren't outcasts. The people who lost. What about Mother Shipton, the prostitute? She gets outcast. What about all the men that came to see her? So, there's a lot there to tell us about Poker Flat in itself, which is not explored, but it's there.
So there might be like one question on that.
Yeah, I'm not positive, but I'm just giving you some thoughts right now. So someone asked, to look at a character and see how they change throughout the story, or if they're just flat dynamic. Or maybe one person asked to look at 2 of the characters, but I don't remember everything. Let me see. What did Dennis say? Okay, so he's also talking about the end of the story. So what I said is, did you see that foreshadowed? Could you see that coming? Anyway, it's also a story that has to do with appearances. People seem one way, but you have to look deeper. All right, I'll just wind down here. Is there any story or did you want Paul? Oh, Revolt of Mother. Right. So someone said, why this revolt, especially when people would have such negative impressions about what she was doing. So you can think about everything that kind of led up to that revolt.
The war prayer.
The war prayer. Someone asked about the title, the war prayer. That was the very first thing we've ever read in this
And
class.
it's gone.
No, it's still up there.
No, it's out of my brain.
Oh, but it's this person who comes in and everyone says he's a lunatic. And why is he a lunatic? I'm not sure. If I do the war prayer, it's probably going to be as an extra credit question, just to let you know, because that was a very short thing and we did it quickly. But it's an important piece, and I think it speaks to readers today. So I could even imagine saying, how would this resonate today, or would it? Paul's case, there are some people who are very sympathetic towards Paul, feel like he's a lost soul, and there are some who say, that punk. I'm looking at Haley. You're not very sympathetic to him. Okay. So there are some who are not very sympathetic to him. And so I might say, which are you and why? Okay. And certainly you'd have a lot to go on there. I think I'm going to wind down, but the Negro Speaks of Rivers. We got a couple people to talk about that. Langston Hughes. I said I'm leaning towards his 2 and 4. 2 is, in what ways are the rivers symbolic in this poem? DJ asks, it's Dennis, he goes by DJ, how have the rivers affected the African American culture? Well, so how do they represent African American culture? What's the significance of the rivers? So he asks that in both 2 and 4. Let me see what the others say. Let me open up one more. see what Jacob says. Okay. Jacob, I tell him I can see asking any of your questions. Certainly the rivers are symbolic and worth discussing. So whenever something comes up a few times, it must give me pause. So he also asks about the significance of the rivers. And he also says, I've known rivers, like why the repetition? I've known rivers, I've known this, I've known this. So I ask you, what does that mean, I have known? And in the last video that we did, I said also pay attention to that present perfect tense. He doesn't say I know rivers or I knew rivers. I have known them. I knew them back then. I still know them to this day. So what is the significance of that repetition, I've known? And then also he talks about it being in first person. And how would this change if it wasn't in first person? Is this Hughes talking about himself or talking about the African American people, or what, you might think about the significance of the perspective, first person perspective that he uses. So over the spring break, here, let me go back to us. I'm going to show us again. Don't get nervous. Where do I?
Stop sharing. Right there.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's get the screen back. Okay, I don't see us. Let me see, maybe. Peter, how do I get us back? Peter, how do I show us one more time?
Green at the top.
The green at the top. That's what I did. Oh,
There we go.
I guess I didn't do it enough. Okay, so
Tricky mouse.
clearly it's open book. You're at your home. You've got the book in front of you. Open notes. The more you prepare, the easier you're going to have with this midterm. I'm giving you 5, but it shouldn't take you that long. But since I'm giving you so long, do your best to try to answer those extra credit questions. Again, I can't stress enough, while you're responding, save it into a separate doc. Right? That's another reason why I'm giving you extra time, because I don't want that to happen again.
Well, I liked Vanessa, right? Her idea of typing it into a Word doc and then copying and pasting it.
That's what I
That's
was
even a safer way to go.
Beautiful.
Because if you type right into the discussion boxes, if it disappears, you are out of luck.
Okay, did you guys hear
It
Brian?
happened to me already.
Okay, testify, brother.
You're right.
Okay, so just have a good time. You've got a long week to mull this stuff over. Just, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. But if you have any questions, ask me, and then we'll replicate this when we get to the final 2. So everything from the war prayer all the way up through A Raisin in the Sun. And then when we come back, all the pieces post Lorraine Hansberry will be for the final. And that's about it. Okay?
I had a quick question, sorry.
Okay, quick question.
So, when we do about the whole quote thingy, because there are some questions that like we went through, there's some that's just personal, and I don't think I would put a quote. Could you be like, give me advice, or
Can you think of one question that you said, I don't think I need
about the Paul's, like the sympathy, like that's more of like a personal question.
Right, but it's based on, it's not like a personal response that just comes out of the air.
Yeah.
It's based on what you read in Paul's story, right? So you're still, even if you don't have to directly quote it, you can paraphrase, you can summarize, you just need to refer back to the text. You can't say, I don't feel sympathy for Paul without giving us what happened in Paul's story. Or I feel great sympathy for him without telling us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're going to wave bye. Bye.
Bye.
And I'm going to stop the broadcast.